So today we're very excited to introduce to you all Jim Jones, Sarah Dolamore, and Debbe Crandall. Did I pronounce that right?
Pretty close, Crandall.
Crandall, sorry about that. Who are all from Mount Wolfe Farm, a 90-acre family-owned sustainable farm in Caledon. So I'll give quick introductions, and these are just very brief introductions from all of our presenters. So first up, we have Debbe, who has an impressive background in green initiatives, such as the Save the Oak Ridges Moraine Coalition, where she has been a member since 1990 and its executive director since 1999. She is also the founding director of the Oak Ridges Institute for Applied Sustainability. And in 2016, Debbe and her three sisters started Mount Wolfe Farm on their family's 90 acres, a sustainable farm that marries ecosystem protection, amazing food production, community well-being, and an enhanced love of the land. Next, we have Sarah, who's the farm manager at Mount Wolfe Farms, as well as a very active member of the community. She is a committee member for the NFU Ontario Local 305G, a member of the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, and a volunteer for the Town of Caledon Community Climate Change Task Force. Sarah is also an associate of the Oak Ridges Institute for Applied Sustainability. Last but not least, we have Jim, who is a socio-ecologist, researcher, and writer. He works with stories to help people and organizations make sense of our complex world, create visions, and plan action. He has 20 years experience in the UK conservation sector, creating and managing citizen science projects, and where he developed skills and tools for partnership building and collaborative action planning. Finally, in the fall of 2020, he will begin working towards his PhD in social and ecological sustainability at the University of Waterloo. So I will now hand over the floor to our presenters for a roughly 45-minute presentation, where the three of them will discuss Mount Wolfe Farm's approach to local, regenerative, and equitable food systems, followed by a question period. Just for our participants, if you can keep yourself on mute for the time being, if any questions come to mind, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them after the presentation. Right, so I'll hand it over to the three of you now.
That's great. Thanks, Nicole, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our presentation. As Nicole said, we'll have about 45 minutes. We're each going to talk for about 15 minutes. I'm going to start, then Deb is going to be next, and then Sarah is going to talk in a bit. And there'll be questions afterwards. So let me just get the talk up. Do apologise if there's any background noise. We have a rather lively dog here at the moment, so he is being managed though. So right, let me just get the slides up. Okay, so Nicole, can you just let me know if you can see the slides all right?
Yep, everything looks good.
That's great. So our talk is going to be is called Farming for the Future, and it's basically about Mount Wolfe Farm's approach to farming and ecological land management. So just see how I fast forward this. So I'm going to start off by setting the scene, and if you like, we're going to kind of take a top-down approach. We're going to go from the global level. Deb's then going to talk about the local context, particularly about the Greater Toronto area. And finally, Sarah's going to talk about what we do on the farm. Hopefully, you'll find this really interesting. So to begin with, and excuse the pun, but I couldn't resist it. Part of being in a farming family is that you have to get used to puns quite a lot. So setting the Anthropocene. Many of you will probably know, especially if you've been connected with the environment. It's not hard to know at the moment that human civilization has basically reached a point where its impact is felt across the globe, and even so much that you know, we can now see its impact in the geological record, so that a new geological time period has been proposed called the Anthropocene. I don't know if any of you have recently seen some of the great footage that has been captured by Edward Batinsky and seen the film about the Anthropocene, but it's well worth seeing. We didn't see the film. We did see the film, yeah, and it was great, but a little bit kind of what is happening to the world. So the Anthropocene, the reasons for the Anthropocene or the effects of the Anthropocene have basically been variously described by people, but commonly called like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is kind of saying how drastic it is. Two of the things that mark it out in particularly is that we appear to be going through a sixth mass extinction, and also anthropogenic climate change. So recently we've had the kind of announcement of a climate change emergency, but also a recognition that at the same time we are going through a biodiversity crisis as well, an ecological crisis as well. But coupled in with that, what marks the Anthropocene is also widespread poverty and economic uncertainty for a rather large portion of the world. The distance between the richest 1% and people with less money is growing, not shrinking. And one of the other things that marks the Anthropocene is this vision of social collapse, the interrelationships between in society becoming so undermined that eventually society isn't going to function. So I'd just like to look quickly at some of the drivers behind the mass extinctions that are going on at the moment. Overwhelmingly, they are, you know, over 50% of the drivers are changes in land use. So we're seeing that the conversion of pristine forest and other habitat into farmland and also buildings, but we're also seeing direct exploitation. So this is, you know, the use of foodstuffs, the use of land and also other items around the world in the human economy, as well as those. So you can see there that over 50% of land and sea use change and direct exploitation is causing these kind of biodiversity losses. Coupled with that, there's the effects of climate change, the effects of pollution and invasive alien species. So these are the direct impacts on the world that are causing these problems. But behind these direct drivers are something that we have to get to grips with. You know, as Nicole mentioned, I worked for 20 years in the conservation sector in the UK for the local wildlife trust, and it became clear to me after not too long that actually there aren't really any conservation problems per se. There are just human problems. So most of the indirect drivers of these habitat losses are proximate causes are all social. So we're looking at things like demographic issues, the fact that, you know, in many parts of the world human population is expanding still. We're looking at consumption patterns that many societies certainly in the Western world are consuming far too much, far more than, you know, 2.5 planets worth in terms of an ecological footprint. We're also, you know, looking at economic patterns that undermine this disruption of the planet's ecosystems. This kind of addiction to continued growth, the exploitation of the planet, which up until very recently hasn't really used impact on the environment in its balance sheets. So it's been considered this idea of the tragedy of the commons, that you know, the environment, water and air and you know, forest is out there just for our exploitation. There are also obviously political reasons for these causes as well. Some things like you know, there are dictatorships in the world that are focused on the exploitation of resources over and above protection, and even not just dictatorships, but you know, our Western economy is driven by free market economy. So that's also underpinning these impacts. And some of the impacts that we have, I'm not sure whether you can see them behind all these pictures. I'm just going to make them smaller. So things like natural ecosystems have declined by 47%. Species extinction risk has gone up. Ecological communities have declined by 23%, and so on and so forth. So we're really making a huge impact on the face of the earth. As well as this, we are also seeing climate warming. This is a quote from the recent 2018 global warming report from global warming of 1.5 degrees C. We're already seeing the consequences of 1 degree C of global warming through more extreme weather, rising sea levels and diminishing Arctic sea ice, amongst other changes. So this is a really, really important issue. Now, it's all very well to see these issues, these biodiversity loss and climate change, as, you know, separate issues. But, you know, a couple of quotes here from one of my favorite authors, John Muir. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find that it's bound fast by 1,000 invisible cords that cannot be broken to everything in the universe. And then again, a more local author, Margaret Atwood, you know, this is underpinning the fact that everything in the world is connected and is very difficult to separate. So what I would like to talk about just going forward in the next few minutes is the idea of what we call socio-ecological systems. So I'm a socio-ecologist. So as well as being trained as an ecologist, I look now at the interconnections of socio-ecological systems. So at the basis of this, it's a realization that humans are part of and not separate from nature. And I think, you know, since the Industrial Revolution, we've been seen as something separate. We've seen ourselves as transgressing and overcoming nature. But since the advent of ecology in the early 19th, 20th century, we've started to realize that we are best placed at the center of an ecological world. And this picture here that you can see on the slide at the moment, basically, without exploring it in too much detail, looks at how biological systems, economic systems, and social ecosystems are all interlinked, so that an impact on one has an impact on the other, and not just that they're interlinked, but they have feedback on each other. So one of the ways you can look at this is that that you can see that this approach holds that social and ecological systems are linked through what we call feedback mechanisms, and they both display something called resilience and complexity. So resilience is the ability of a system to absorb various disturbances and then reorganize itself. And some people talk about it as just resetting itself back to what it was in the first place. But actually, resilience is actually being able to go through change and find new, stable levels on which to operate. And I think that's something that we've got to think about as we go forward with socio-ecological systems, and particularly agriculture. This slide is a slide from the Stockholm Resilience Centre, which looks at the fact that they've set out this idea that there are planetary boundaries, that the Earth can only support certain levels of activity in things like, and still maintain its stability in certain areas. And you can see here, I hope, if my mouse is working, and you can see that where the orange has the orange wedges are places where we have already gone past the ability of the earth to support biosphere integrity and normal biogeochemical cycles. So we have to keep an eye on these things, and the primary driver for that is our human impacts. One way of approaching and managing the biosphere within sustainable limits is by talking about sustainability, this intersection between economy, society, and the environment. And currently, the United Nations has 17 sustainable development goals, and these were signed by United Nations in 2015 with the idea that we're going to get someplace by about 2030 in order to deliver these. So I'll just highlight a few of them here. Goal 2 is zero hunger, waste less food, and support local farmers. And these are very, all these I've just selected 4 here, which are appropriate to farming and agriculture. Goal 13 is reduce, act now to stop global warming. Goal 12 is responsible consumption and production. And goal 15 is the protection of life on land. So all these are really important towards the agriculture can have a role in delivering these sustainable development goals. Because one of the things that we need to get our heads around, and we'll talk about this a little more as we go forward, is that modern agriculture is unsustainable on so many fronts, whether that's through the fact that a lot of agriculture is focused on producing monocultures. It degrades the soil and generally reduces the loss of diversity in the biosphere. We have to think going forward of increasing the complexity of our landscapes in terms of to manage impacts of climate change and to reduce species loss. This is, I was talking about social ecological systems earlier. This is agriculture as a social ecological system. And one of the things that you'll see as we talk about the idea of this land is this story is that we're changing our emphasis. We're not just thinking as farming as producing food, but we're thinking of farming as connected to things like rural poverty and livelihoods, rural migration and human health in particular. And these require things like effective governance and decision making at various scales in order to manage that. So going forward, we really need to think about how our landscapes to retain resilience, think about all these different levels of connectivity. So through some of the things that I said. And one of the things I would also like to mention here, you've just seen a little figure, a little Sami shaman pop up with his story drum there. And it's just to remind me to think about stories, that we have to really rethink our stories and the story that we tell about how we use our landscape and how we relate to it in becoming ecological citizens going forward. I'm now going to hand over to Deb, who is going to talk about the more local context in terms of ecosystem, in terms of agriculture and farming.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Well, we can't see the screen.
It's fine. All you can see on the screen is the slides.
Okay, so
Okay.
if you could just.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good. How do I get advance it, please?
Just press that.
Okay. So, hi, everybody. Debbe Crandall, and I just, for the next 15 minutes, just want to kind of talk a little bit about the local context. There's a couple of points that I would like to make, and hopefully in this period, in this 15 minutes, I actually address these. I just want to talk about environmental activism and the role of environmental activism policy frameworks in leading towards more sustainable livelihoods and sustainability. Hope by the end of this you can can take with you that local food, the local food system and all components of it can be a driver of change for social and ecological sustainability. And that there really has to be a paradigm, a shift in the way that we appreciate, understand the role of countryside going forward, so that climate action and sustainability demands that we once again relocalize our countryside's social, ecological, and economic paradigm, that our food systems, our livelihoods, and rural skills, that we are moving towards a local food, rural skills economy. That's it. So this is the Greater Golden Horseshoe. This is the policy framework of the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which goes from Peterborough across over to include Simcoe County, Dufferin County, Wellington, and then wraps around to Niagara region. This particular lens of looking at this area evolved from the Greater Toronto area, then the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, and then in 2005, the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And there are 4 provincial land use plans that cover this jurisdiction. There's the Niagara Escarpment Plan, there's the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan, then the Greenbelt and Places to Grow, or the Growth Plan. So yes, please. So this is just a little bit of a zoom in. It just shows the Oak Ridges Moraine, the Niagara Escarpment, the protected countryside, and then the Growth Plan. And just a little bit about, as I said, the Greenbelt is comprised of the Niagara Escarpment, Oak Ridges Moraine, and then additional protected countryside. And if you read the context level of the Greenbelt Plan, and I'll read from it, is the Greenbelt Plan, together with the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan and the Niagara Escarpment Plan, identifies where urbanization should not occur in order to provide permanent protection to the agricultural land base and the ecological and hydrological features, areas, and functions occurring on this landscape. What's germane to what is really important is to emphasize that the Greenbelt Plan is where urbanization should not occur. The places to grow, so what we see before us, we have these provincial plans, and they very clearly say where development should happen and where development should not happen. And it is that context upon which I just kind of want to kind of unwrap that a little bit. So over the past 40 years, there has been an immense community mobilization to save and protect both the Niagara Escarpment and the Oak Ridges Moraine through environmental activism focused on obtaining provincial legislation. So in 1983, the Niagara Escarpment Plan was ratified. 2001 was the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation legislation and plan, and then the Greenbelt Plan in 2005. So it's been 20 years since the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan was enacted, and it has generally, across the board, been hailed as a success story. So my last 30 years have been dedicated to the pursuit of getting legislation for the Oak Ridges Moraine. And I thought it could only come about by environmental activism that leads to provincial legislation, to the point where it was that once we've got it, that's cool, everything's great. That good planning is what is necessary to protect the landscape and allow the ecological integrity to not emerge, but to focus back on ecological integrity. But since 2015, 2016, when we decided to turn our family's 90 acres into productive community-supported farm operation, that my thinking has shifted about the approach that we can take to save this planet. So the thing is that legislation is only as strong as the public demands it to be strong. And that requires new campaigns that mobilize citizens to take action. mobilizing citizens, having gone through 30 years of doing this, it's hard, and it has a best before date, because it is now 20 years since the Moraine Plan came into effect, and we are starting to see unraveling of it across the board. There's a new generation of people that have come along that have no idea that the Oak Ridges Moraine was anything but protected. So they don't have in their DNA the need to protect this thing because it's there. And so we're falling off our, we're not as diligent as we used to be. And it is that which concerns me. And my thesis is that legislation alone is not sufficient to save and protect our countryside. That in turn, is needed to save and protect us and the planet from impacts from climate change. What the legislation has done has given us, so what the Oak Ridges Moraine, the Greenbelt plans and legislation and framework, they've given us a green canvas upon which we can create a new paradigm, a new appreciation, a new understanding of that integrates both the ecological stewardship with a local food system, which is all of the components of production, processing, distribution, and consumption, and all of the attendant skills, livelihoods, and local economic development that flow from that. That's a really bad slide. I got this off the interweb. So what I just wanted to show, because this is from Peel, that in fact, all of the Greenbelt lies within the region of Peel, apart from the urban corridors, the urban waterways. It lies within the town of Caledon. You go to the next slide. Yeah. And in fact, that 80% of Caledon is greenbelted. So we're one of the only municipalities that has all three plans, which is the Niagara Escarpment Plan, the Oak Ridges Moraine, Greenbelt, and of course the growth plan. The area to the south of the green areas are what's called the White Belt. And of course, we got issues with that, which is where the new 413 may or may not be going. I do digress. This, if you can carry on, please. So a fundamental challenge is that Southern Ontario's settled landscapes fall into a gray zone. They lie outside our cities, but they're not wilderness. And Canadians have a very strong sense of our wilderness. We are hardy because of our snow. We have the Rockies. We've got the Arctic. And what happens is that the settled landscape that drapes around our urban areas, they become areas that people drive through to get to Muskoka. They drive to get to Algonquin Park. We fly to places like the Rockies in order to see wilderness, when in fact, if people could see that there is huge amounts of wilderness and natural habitat right here. And so we've got something that we've got to grapple with. We have this image of what this is, and it's we're a little uncertain as to what actually our countryside really is. And if you go back to the legislation, the Greenbelt is where urbanization does not occur. So that is the way that it is in fact perceived, is not as the potential of it, but what it is not. And it's hard to create visions and strategies when you're looking at it from a negative. I think next one, please. So our countryside is where urban development doesn't go. So that's written in, that's the way that the Ford government, that's the way our politicians are all thinking of this. This has led to an underdeveloped social and public understanding and appreciation of our settled landscapes, and those landscapes that have very, very rich histories. The rural land, 5 minutes to go? Oh my goodness. The rural countryside, as I said, is where growth doesn't occur, and more importantly, in this current capitalist paradigm, where there is more limited economic value per se. What economic value activity there is comes from industrial agriculture. So within this protected landscape, we've got industrial agriculture. And in rural areas outside the Greenbelt, we have agriculture until the city grows outward, and then there's a conversion of that countryside into plans of subdivision, highways, malls, and suburbs. However, in both public policy and popular culture, Ontario's farmed countryside tends to be viewed through a very narrow economic lens of industrial food production or urban development. Next slide, please. Oh, that's my dog, Molly, running. We can go back.
Which one?
That right there. That's Molly.
Molly.
Next one, thanks. So, so how did this picture become okay? How is it okay that we have monocultures being farmed? We've got an aging population. We've got farmers who sit on these $500,000 combines, and they're planting soy, canola, corn, and that's the sum total. This food goes off to the Chicago Exchange, and this is, you know, and then they proudly post farmers feed cities. We have areas where we've got an exchange here. We've got this is from the Ontario Farmland Trust, where we've got countryside right beside a massive sprawl, and then we've got the sprawling stuff. And it's really about that the countryside is losing that economic, social, and ecological diversity as it's becoming more gray. And it's by design that as agriculture by design is scaling up and away from the idealized family farm, and as cities expand in the countryside. So this has profound impacts on the countryside as that rural fabric is frayed. While the land may be protected, it is not vibrant. It requires huge inputs of public and private land, private monies to plant trees, to buy lands. It becomes the playground of the rich, as they have second homes in Toronto and in here. The once prosperous and self-sufficient villages are made up of subdivisions with people commuting away and plugging into a global economy. And the mixed family farm that employs and houses and supports multi-generational families is replaced by that aging farmer who rents those thousands of acres of land and grows those three cash crops, soy, corn, and canola.
This is not being
What?
helped.
Yeah, no, this is not being helped, perhaps hindered. So my thesis is that this is actually not being helped, and in fact is hindered by the provincial policy approaches that don't address rural prosperity itself, but instead focus only on ecological and agricultural land production, i.e. the Greenbelt urban development in the growth plan. One last slide, please. No, sorry, back one. So rural prosperity and ecological stewardship at the same time. That is what we are playing about in, that's what we are exploring, which is that it is not a zero-sum game, that you can have one without excluding the other through sustainable agriculture. That local food systems comprised of a network of small-scale sustainable farms, local producers, processors, distributors, and consumers that create prosperity through rural economic development, employing younger farmers and community members, and produces an engaged land stewards who have a passion and love of the land. That's the environmental activism that comes out of the kind of engagement and a rethinking of our role in this protected countryside. So what has all of this got to do with climate change? So I stole a wonderful graphic of Jim's, which is that our countryside and our natural world and our ingenuity and capacity to innovate are our greatest weapons to fight climate change. That a new perspective on how we see ourselves as part of the biosphere, a new and applied integrative relationship to the land, a realization that it's not a but situation, it's an and world. We can protect the environment and fight climate change, and we can feed people from our countryside, and we can build local communities, and we can all prosper. and make an equitable world a cornerstone principle, and we can treat animals with respect and reintegrate livestock into our farming practices. So, thank
Okay.
you.